These Marian Apparitions serve for me to deepen my faith. My prayer life was enhanced. My relationship with God was real. It became alive. We prayed the rosary at times, and when I was going to work, I would pray the rosary in the car. We knew the Blessed Mother was there to encourage our faith. My name is Jackie Breen. I'm a husband, I'm a father, uncle, and among other things, I'm a permanent deacon in the Diocese of Down in Connor in Northern Ireland. I was born in 1966 in the parish of Downpatrick. It's now my parish of residence, and I was born the eldest of 3 sons in a working class family. In my household, the rosary wasn't necessarily a daily practice. My parents worked shifts and it was difficult, but my parents had the faith and they made it their duty to pass on that faith to us. So I grew up in difficult times in Northern Ireland. Troubles were afoot and there was a lot of societal convulsions. There was death and mayhem. There was chaos outside the family door where we were growing up. So the faith was something that most people relied on to sustain them through these difficult times. Peace in our time was very important. The rosary played a big part in Northern Irish society at that time. Although we weren't praying the rosary regularly at home, we had rosary at school. So I remember many times at school praying for peace in Ireland. Also coming home, we had house prayer. So in various neighbours' houses, we would pray in the evening. This influenced my spirituality growing up, and it stayed with me even to today. Even at times when I had doubts about my faith and even about my vocation, Mary was there. I began training as a psychiatric nurse in the local hospital, Downshire, which was at that time was affiliated with Queen's University and the College of Nursing in Belfast. That was in 1986, and over the next 3 or 4 years I worked as a student nurse within the trust, and I qualified in 1990. At that stage in my career I took a break and went to London. I worked in some of the big hospitals there as an agency nurse, and for a while in Oxford before returning to Northern Ireland. On coming back, not long after that, I met Tracy, who was to become my wife. And gradually, and I use the word gradually, we grew in faith together and turned back to God in our own ways, praying together, growing closer to Our Lady and to Jesus. We prayed the rosary at times, and when I was going to work, I would pray the rosary in the car and on the way home again.
Myself totally to you, my body, my soul, my goods, and even the value of my good actions. Mary, I give you my heart. Mary, I give you my heart. Set it on fire with love for Jesus, with love for Jesus, with love for Jesus.
In 1976, the peace movement began in Northern Ireland, and I have a memory of attending one of those large rallies in Downpatrick. It was primarily responded to by the women in society. And those rallies went on, and that sense of Mary calling us to peace stayed with me. I also remember in 1979, travelling through the night, praying in the dark as we went to Drogheda to meet up with St. John Paul II. The Pope was coming to Drogheda because he couldn't come into the north because of the Troubles. But when he was there, some of his words stayed with me. He particularly prayed in Drogheda for an end to violence, having come through the Second World War himself, facing the onslaught of the Nazi regime. He prayed that the people in Ireland would set down their arms and end the armed struggle and come to a peaceful resolution. As did people like John Hume, who was a former seminarian and politician. But John Paul II really spoke to me. When he was in Knock, he consecrated the people of Ireland to our Blessed Mother. And then again, when he was in Galway, he spoke specifically to the young people when he said, "Young people of Ireland, I love you." That was real encouragement for us, for myself and for my friends as we were growing up. We knew that the Blessed Mother was there to encourage our faith, and we had the backing of the Catholic Church on our journey. Despite having grown up practicing my faith, as a teenager, I began to drift away. There was no reason for it. It just sort of happened gradually. Rebelling against my faith and my parents was part and parcel of growing up. The secular world was telling me, why be a Catholic? You don't need to be a Catholic at all. I didn't have that personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I got into the way of the world. I left home, started nursing. No one was looking over my shoulder, so it was easier to go out for a night partying or just not go out or just not bother going to Mass. My parents at that stage were saying, it's up to you. They had given me every reason to believe and every reason to practice. But at that stage, I made wrong choices. And for a number of years, I hadn't fallen out with God per se. I hadn't stopped believing in God. I hadn't stopped believing in the Blessed Mother. But I just wasn't convinced that the Catholic way was the way I ought to have a relationship with God. My return to faith was slow. I found myself at one stage on my bedside locker with a copy of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, a Bible, and the Code of Canon Law. And in these three books, I began to find my faith again logically. At the same time, I had a friend who was an agnostic, and his name's John. And he would pose questions to me about Marian Apparitions. Growing up, I had been familiar with the Little Shepherds of Fatima, and I'd seen the miracle of Our Lady of Fatima, the movie, when I was a young man. So I was intrigued then with Marian Apparitions, and that led me to purchase Lucia's book, Fatima in My Own Words. That book changed my life. I read it. I became more familiar with what had happened at Fatima, of Our Lady's message of repentance and returning to God. I also went on to buy other books, the Calls to the Message of Fatima, and another book sticks in my mind by Randall O'Sullivan, which was called The Miracle Detective. And at that time, it was examining the authenticity, legitimacy of Marian Apparitions, how these apparitions were deemed to be authentic by the Church, how they were investigated, and it spanned the whole earth. I was blown away by the number of apparitions and by the content. So at this stage, I had a belief that Our Lady was somehow guiding me back to Jesus, back to God, back to full communion with the Catholic Church, because of what she was saying at these apparitions was correct. Fatima, for me, was a great influence. I was determined to go there, and I was on a holiday with some friends, a walking holiday in the Algarve, and I had a prompting to travel up to Fatima, and it was just a thought in my head, and I put it to the guys who were with me. I said, should we go to Fatima for a day? And they surprisingly both said yes. That was in 2002. And we travelled to Fatima, spent the day there, standing in the COVID area. I was absolutely amazed. I could feel the presence of the Blessed Mother who had shielded me and protected me and directed me back to the Catholic faith. We walked through the rain to the village of Agistrel, where the children had grown up. And these places that I read about were now vividly alive. I was touching them physically, but I could also feel an emotional attachment there, something that I hadn't anticipated, where I felt the love of the Mother of God, her love for me. And I was determined that I would come back to Fatima. I visited Coimbra, where Lucia stayed as a nun. I visited Fatima with family, with friends. And we arrived there on the 14th of February 2005. That was the day after Sister Lucia died. So when we came out of the airport at Faro, the newspapers, the headlines were all about Lucia is dead. I couldn't believe it. But I saw it as a gift. I recognized that even being in Portugal the day after Lucia had died, to be there at that time was a gift from the Blessed Mother and an affirmation that I was on the right road. In 2010, I had my first opportunity to travel to the Marian Apparitions site of Medjugorje. I'd heard of Medjugorje. There was no pronunciation by the Catholic Church on its authenticity, but I'd heard of many conversions, and this place was somewhere I'd have known of, but this was the first chance I had to go. And my trip there was a day trip. I visited the original apparition site at Podbrado, the Hill of Apparitions, and I walked through the fields, and I came back from there thinking, there is something wonderful about this place, something peaceful, something that touched my heart. There's like an outpouring of grace. One of the friars at Medjugorje once said, every pilgrimage is a journey closer to the heart of God the Father. These Marian apparitions and these pilgrimages to those various sites served for me to deepen my faith. When I was there, my prayer life was enhanced. My relationship with God was real. It became alive simply because I was visiting places that I knew were associated with Mary. And you know, as parents, myself and Tracy, the primary thing for us in life is the salvation of our children and the handing on of the faith to them. And because it's a lived faith through the liturgies, it's always backed up through the liturgies, through Scripture. It's backed up for us through Mary and her love for us. And so we respond with our devotion to her. I would have gone to Garabandal. I went with one of those friends in 2012 to Garabandal. And the same year, I went with my daughter to the Rue de Bac, where the Miraculous medal was given to St. Catherine Laboure in 1830. I remember reading about it many years ago, and what stuck in my mind was Catherine Laboure praying in the chapel, and she could hear the sound of silk, like someone walking in a silk dress. And as she turned round, it was the Blessed Mother. And that just filled my heart full of love. How wonderful to hear the silk dress of our Blessed Mother approaching. And this was important as a story, that I would tell these stories to my kids. We would tell them the stories and get their interest enkindled in Marian Apparitions as well. I have no doubt that these things will stand by my children long after I have left this world. Around 2010, I began to feel that perhaps God was asking me to do a little bit more. And I thought perhaps I could bring other souls to God through Mary. And my notion was that I was familiar with Marian movies, and I had an attachment to Fatima in particular. So in 2011, I showed a movie and various other movies I helped promote, like Garab and Dal, God Only Knows. And these movies, their success enabled me to raise some money for charity. They also were a means of evangelization, not necessarily in an explicit way, but to bring people to God through Mary, to save those souls and to introduce them to a loving relationship with God.
Beautiful flower of Carmel, most fruitful vine, splendor of heaven, holy and singular, Mother mine, who brought forth the Son of God, remaining a virgin pure.
In the spring of 2014, one of my colleagues at work, I was working locally in mental health, this nurse came up to me and said, "Jackie, have you applied for the permanent diaconate?" Well, I looked at Betty and I said, "Betty, I'm not really sure." I didn't even know what it was. For me, a deacon was someone who was ordained and then becomes a priest. So I went away and I looked at it, and I learned that there were transitional deacons and permanent deacons. And I immediately dismissed it. I thought, no, surely not. That's not what God would want me to do. I'm doing enough for him already. And I set it aside and thought I'd leave that. But the Blessed Mother didn't give up. She came back to me on numerous occasions, and when I read scripture or I was praying, or other people just coming to me would mention the permanent diaconate. So I spoke to my parish priest, I spoke to some priest friends about it, and I had a plan that I would leave it and pray about it, keep discerning, but leave it aside until when nearer the time I was due to retire in 2021. Whilst I was in the Philippines, it was the International Eucharistic Congress, and we had travelled as a group, and we were staying in Cebu for the conference. But my friends, Marivic and Danny, whose son's a priest, Father Mamolito in our own diocese, they invited me to a place called Lipa in Batangas, which meant we had to fly north up to Manila and then make a short journey out to the Carmelite convent. While we were there was an older priest that I'd been looking after as a nurse on the trip. And this was Danny's uncle, Father Vic. Father Vic had dementia, he wasn't lucid, he had some difficulties interacting. In Batangas at the Lipa convent, it was the 26th of January 2016. I remember it distinctly. The readings were about St. Paul's conversion on the road to Jerusalem from Acts 22. And from Mark's Gospel, the commission, preach the gospel throughout the world. Now, after the gospel, I kind of expected Father Vic to sit down and let the younger priest preach. But he remained standing, and he preached eloquently, full of wisdom, like a young man. His speech was strong, he spoke with conviction, and in the middle of it, he stopped. And here's the thing, I'd been pleading to our mother, "Mother, please help me know what God's will is. I'm on this pilgrimage within a pilgrimage. Surely my heart can be at rest. Give me some contentment." I didn't expect to have this answer at the other side of the world. But Father Vic stopped mid-sermon and looked at me. He said to me these words, "Do you not believe that God will give you grace enough now to do what he's asking you to do?" The Mother Mary had dramatically answered my questions through this very holy priest, Father Vic, way on the other side of the world. And I had become convinced that through Mary, God was calling me to become a permanent deacon. I discerned over a weekend with my wife in January 2017, exactly a year later, where my parish priest had said, "Jackie, you know that thing you were kind of waiting until 21 to apply for? I'd like you and Tracy to pray over the weekend and consider applying next week." So over the course of the weekend, we prayed, and my wife came to the conclusion that, Jackie, this is God's time. This is kairos, not chronos. You must respond now because your parish priest is asking you to apply now. And so we submitted our letter, blessed with Mary's words of wisdom, that we take part in this journey, that we put our names forward as a couple, that I would discern becoming a permanent deacon. And I know for sure that all through that time, she's been with me. She's been praying for us, interceding for us. And she's been with me, sustaining my focus and improving my prayer life during that time, enabling me to find time to study, find time for my family, but to continue working as a nurse part-time. She's been there. She's been there all along. The 19th of February 2022 was a day that's very special to me. All my previous sacraments had taken place in Downpatrick, in my own parish. On the 19th of February, I was ordained to the permanent diaconate. And at the moment of my ordination, when Bishop Noel Traynor laid his hands on my head, I consecrated my diaconal ministry to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. So Mary always points to Jesus, and then somehow she enlivens the faith. She brings you alive, and there's a firm conviction comes with that firm faith. And that conviction is to get yourself to heaven, to avoid hell, and to lead as many souls as you can to God and to salvation.
My name is Michael O'Neill. I'm the Miracle Hunter. We're talking today about some of the famous Marian icons that are considered miraculous around the world. One of Pope Francis's favorite Marian icons is that of Our Lady of Luján in Argentina. And the story goes like this, that the statue was originally from Brazil, but there was somebody from Argentina who wanted to build a chapel or a settlement dedicated to the Virgin Mary and needed a chapel there. So the statue was brought into port and animals carried the statue further to arrive at that town. Eventually, they needed to take a break along the way, and then when they arose in the morning and decided to continue on, the animals refused to move that statue. Now, as a test, the statue was removed from their carts, and then the animals freely went forward. So they took this as a sign of Our Lady, that she wanted that exact spot to be the chapel there. Later, a great basilica was built, and she became the patroness of Argentina. And this became one of the great Marian devotions from all of South America. And that's Our Lady of Luján from Argentina in the early 1600s.
Are you searching for purpose of life? Discover your true identity. Stay tuned to Shalom World.